Gareth's report, and that is 8.11. So you can go through the report, Gareth, and then hopefully by the time we get to the discussion on the cruise passengers bus service, then there might be other interested parties back. So thank you.
Through the chair, just happy to table the GM report part as read and take any questions, and then can get on to the recommendation in regards to cruise ships after that.
Thank you. So elected members, are there any questions specifically on Gareth's report, apart from the bus issue at this point in relation to other topics? Thank you, Councillor Baldock.
Just a question to Paul, I think, if I may, regarding the funding that this may come out of, the 150. Just a clarification that was parking revenue that was being used, not rate funding. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I'm just confirming that was an option that was. Yeah, that is correct. Noting that activity still is under quite a bit of pressure from a debt perspective. Yep.
We were certainly deferring the debt repayment kind of thing, really. We know it's not.
Any other questions of the report before we talk about the CBD bus? Yeah, Councillor Baldock.
Well, I guess now we have the letter from Main Street, which are requesting 20, and the recommendation here is about 10. So I guess we could ask you to speak to whether you would amend the recommendation to 20 or whether you think the 10 is the right amount, given.
Through the chair, we just recommended what was asked for and finished and published the report, and the letter came in late, which asked for a different amount of money. We haven't done any additional work into whether or not 10 versus 20 is the right amount to recommend. We got that letter at 7:30 a.m. this morning.
Since the delegation was to the Chief Executive, I might ask him if, since we're talking about it coming out of that 150, is 20 reasonably doable or not?
Well, 100 of the 150 is committed, so there is a remaining 50,000 that Council has the ability to apportion on the merits, I think, of the information in front of them.
So just to clarify, I thought this was on top of the 150. I just want to clarify that it's included within the 150. And if that is the case, what might be coming out of that 150, the discretionary spend?
Well, the 100 is committed, and of the remaining 50, essentially, we were holding that back to see what the outcome of Our Place discussion was. Conscious that Council may be up for some costs if that project was to discontinue. At this stage, we don't know what those costs might be.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Councillor Robson.
Yeah, question to the report, the section headed City Centre, paragraph 110, the Activate Pilot Program. Is it possible to share with councillors, there was some discussion in the community around the process that resulted in this particular allocation. There was discussion about panels and people being involved in decision-making process, which then didn't happen. There was correspondence which wasn't followed up with. Various things happened, but be that as it may, there's a decision obviously being made. Is it possible to get a copy of what the sort of performance agreement is with regard to that 100, what the deliverables are, what the outcomes being delivered, what the metrics, KPIs? 100,000 is a significant sum of money. Is there any documentation available to elected members so we can understand what we're getting for that 100,000?
Through the chair, we can get that information. So Priority 1 managed that process on behalf of Council, and they've been negotiating with the parties to develop KPIs in terms of reference, so we can seek a copy of that.
That would be really appreciated. Thank you.
Are there any other points that elected members want to raise before we talk specifically about the bus? Is it Councillor Arbery?
Yeah, just a question. The regional or sub-regional homelessness strategy that the community development team is working on with our other partners, just keen to get, because I think that's due in March, how's that going? Is that tracking along well?
Through the chair, so yes, that is tracking well. The group has met a couple of times. They're on track to deliver a pretty comprehensive action plan mid to late March. So all energies are kind of focused on that, and then linking that into the money that's just been available from central government to see how we can kind of maximise that opportunity, and then also leveraging off the mayor's wish to form a task force to really give this some energy. So just trying to put all that stuff together by mid to late March so that we can we push go.
Councillor Kitty?
I'm just looking at number 108, question D, Te Papa Anō Manupuru Takataka, final elements and option development for future improvements. Can you enlighten me a little bit more on what that might be, please?
Through the chair, there'll be a report that comes back along that to clarify that stuff, but there is options for additional planting, there's options for upgrades to the toilet block and or completely removing the toilet block and building a new one. So we want to put all of those ideas in front of council to see if there's any appetite for doing some other things. The ideas are in development at the moment.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, so we've got the recommendation to receive the report and also allocate 10,000. That's the current recommendation. Would elected member like to move that or a similar recommendation? Councillor Borlett, you're moving as is written in the report. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Hollis. So, Councillor Borlett.
Yeah, look, the whole season has been fraught by this decision by the port to change the system so late in the piece, and it's been very difficult to try and come up with the alternatives. I think we're pretty all familiar with the efforts being made, and it's in the report and in other information that's been given to us. I think 10,000 is a reasonable contribution. It does send us a signal that we are supportive of it. The Main Street and other retailers, and what former Councillor Malloy has done with trying to raise some money as well, should get some buses into the city. I don't buy the argument that somehow Mount are being shortchanged, because they benefit from every cruise season by just people walking off the boats and down into the town. And, you know, to try and say they're not being treated fairly, I don't think is fair. And as was pointed out by Councillor Hughes earlier, and she may make the speech a bit longer, but, you know, we heard from the art gallery. I'm not sure that we can compute the number of passengers with an entry fee into the art gallery, but definitely it is a destination that many of the passengers get to, and the Elms, of course, as well. And the point about it just bringing people into the city for some vibrancy. So it's a reasonable contribution. Next season, you know, we need to get something worked out. And I've heard actually that already one of the bigger cruise ships, I think it was the Queen Elizabeth, they arranged their own bus, free bus, which could go on alongside and brought a lot of people into the CBD and so on. So I just think we need to make a good decision here and get on with making the most of the rest of the season for the benefit of the city centre.
Thank you. The seconder, Councillor Hollis.
Yeah, I agree with Larry. I think anything that we can do to encourage cruise ship people to stay within our two city centres is worthwhile. Just remembering that the cruise ship people ought to have a choice between the two as well if they're on limited time budgets. But yes, fully support that. Fully support it.
Thank you. Councillor Hughes.
I just wanted to explore the letter this morning in regard to 20,000 as opposed to 10,000 that came through late. Has there been Gareth, can you comment on your thoughts around that, or someone can comment on whether the recommendation to make it higher would give us a better outcome, or whether $10,000 should be sufficient?
Through the chair, as I mentioned before, we got the letter late, so haven't had any opportunity to compare what a $10,000 contribution versus a $20,000 contribution could do. It would be my assumption that when $10,000 was asked for, that was enough to do what they needed to do. I think the letter says that, to paraphrase, they thought they may as well try it on and see if we could get a bit more to make it a bit easier and provide a bit better service, and so be it. I think the intention here is to, put some money towards it, get through this season, and then do a thorough review of all of the kind of cruise ship operations and with all of the relevant parties, and come up with a better plan for next summer.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Kitty?
Yes, I'm also in full support of it. I think it's a great idea. Just working on things with Brian Berry before, I am aware that there's been a bit of a disconnection between the Mount and Tauranga. I'd like to see that there is some way possible that we can talk to both places, because I actually do think it's important to, if we're going to offer a free bus service, that the option is to go to the Mount as well as Tauranga. And I believe that the Main Street there need to be contacted and made sure that they ensured that they can get on a meeting regarding that, if that's possible, please.
Thank you. Councillor Kitty, were you suggesting that they perhaps make a contribution as well, or not?
I'm certainly not going to suggest that at this stage. There may be a conflict on me because we do go to those meetings, but I am suggesting that something needs to be done for the Mount retailers as well if we're going to put in money for a bus service.
Thank you. Councillor Morris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've alerted the chair of the Mount Main Street Board to the conversation we had earlier this morning to perhaps facilitate a discussion. Question, if I may, at this time, of Gareth. Mr. Wallace. In terms of the recommendation, there's a figure in there, $10,000. If having received the letter today, would there be any issue if we actually took the figure out and just left it up to staff? We've already, that $150,000 last year was given, and there was a process and was delegated to staff. If we removed the figure and delegated the decision, be essentially to staff the metric, would that be useful or not?
The 150,000, there was already a delegated authority, the chief executive, make a decision. I was aware that there were differing views on the allocation and use of money for buses from the port to town, so I thought it best to bring back to council, so essentially council could determine the sum of money and yeah. Just in relation to 10 versus 20, look, I think it probably would just provide comfort to provide additional buses and complete the full service. So really, it's up to council to decide.
Thank you. Councillor Morris?
Sorry, would you recommend removing the 10 within the resolution that's there? Resolution B, approve a $10,000 contribution. And so it just would read, instead, approve a contribution. Would you recommend removing the actual number there or not?
No, I think council should decide the number. Yeah.
Thank you, Marty. Councillor Arbery?
So I'm happy to support this one time, but I struggle with the idea, or I wonder whether council should be in the business of operating or supporting buses, and if we're sending buses to the CBD, do we also look at sending buses to Greardon Village? I think it's could be a can of worms, or whether that money could be spent elsewhere. So happy to support this 10,000 this one time, but going forward, I'd like it looked at.
Thank you. Councillor Robson?
Before I speak to the topic, effectively confirm that we're debating at the moment the recommendation as proposed
That's
We have a
correct.
mover and a
Yes, A and
seconder.
B, correct, yeah.
I'd like to propose an amendment
What would
that
that be?
we approve up to, and I imagine the amount in the activation, in the fund is some 50, up to $50,000 to support a free CBD cruise ship shuttle services through to the end of the cruise season. And if I get a seconder, I'll speak to it.
So is there a seconder for that or not? There, Councillor Hollis. Okay, Councillor Robson.
Thank you. I am under no doubt whatsoever that the best bang for buck people on street activation we have available to us is a free bus service delivering cruise passengers to downtown Tauranga. I understand there are issues about the experience they get, how that needs to be framed, how downtown Tauranga, if you like, is presented to them as an opportunity. My feeling at the moment is we have made a wrong decision previously. We delegated to the chief executive. I appreciate the process that went through, but I do believe we've made a bad call. However, I'm conscious there is still 50 in the tin. This, properly applied, means that those retailers that are currently having to fund this out of their own pocket won't have to. I believe they've already made sufficient contribution via their Main Street levies, which they in effect pay, to expect this service. I also feel that we need to have a proper look at this issue. I'm really concerned that we're operating on a reasonably sparse report and an accompanying letter which makes some sort of veiled accusations apparently in one of the paragraphs about behaviours of other people in the city. We need to open this can up because at the moment I'm not comfortable with what's in the can and I can't get a proper view of it. But for the minute, what I want to do is to make sure that those cruise buses happen as soon as possible and there's no more time spent with people chasing small amounts of money when we have money in the tin available right now to provide the best bang for buck activation we can provide. And it's not just for the retailers. We heard last night about the impact on the art gallery. There's also an impact on the Olms for those people who walk that far, and Bain. There's a whole lot of issues here. So that's why I want the 50 spent. It's for activating. Time is running out this year. Let's get it done.
Thank you, seconder. Councillor Hollis, do you want to speak? Anyone? Councillor Baldock.
Yeah, I'll support the amendment because the wording is up to 50. In effect, it's kind of throwing the delegation back to the chief executive. But we don't want this to come back to us. There is still 3 months to run in the season. Perhaps it's worth having this flexibility there. I know the chief executive has to also consider the issues with our place and so on. So I don't think this is a mandate to go and write a cheque out for 50 grand necessarily. But if the other funding that's been promised doesn't come through and that means the service would fall over, it would be better that we had this flexibility, I think. So I will support the amendment.
Councillor Arbery.
Only 10,000 was originally asked for. They said 20,000 would be good. I don't know why we'd go more than what was requested.
Thank you. And speaking to it, I totally share your sentiments, Councillor Arbery. I was happy with 10. 20 to me was a stretch to possibly go to 50, especially given that there are other issues within the CBD that we need to address, and that 50 could well be utilised in other more productive ways. So I'll be voting against the amendment. Anyone else would like to speak to the amendment? Okay, I will put just the amendment. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Not me. Councillor Mayor Tenby Powell, Councillor Morris, Salisbury, Robson, Kiddy, Baldock, Hughes and Hollis, and against Councillor Clout and Arbery. So that is carried. So we now then move to the substantive motion, which is receiving the report and then approving the up to $50,000. Oh, yes, and you'd like to continue discussion on it? Thank you.
Speaking to the substantive motion, I don't want this to come back to us. I don't want any more letters making veiled accusations or giving one perspective. I want those cruise buses running free off the port to activate this CBD. But there are a whole lot of issues that flow from this debacle of a cruise season that we've seen, the stress, the pressure, the discussions, the clear lack of collaboration between people that we fund. I hear different stories from different people. I want us to get inside this topic before the next cruise season starts. We, meaning us, the people that effectively provide the wherewithal to downtown, who fund tourism, Bay of Plenty. There's a whole lot of players in here, and I just want to get this thing flushed up and dealt with properly so the next cruise season works effectively and efficiently, because this one's been a shambles.
Thank you. And speaking to the substantive issue, I won't repeat what I said before, but I think it's really important that there are other retailers and commercial outlets within the CBD that should be contributing to this free bus service. And so by us increasing that potential limit, I believe that takes away the imperative for their contributions to be made. So I'll be taking it in parts, A and B. I'll be voting against B. So, any other discussion before I go back to the original mover? Okay, thank you, Councillor Baldock. Okay, I'll be putting part A and B separately. So those in favour of A, receiving the report, say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Those in favour of B, please raise your hand. Mayor Tembi Powell, Councillor, well, it's basically everybody except for against, Councillor Clout and Arbery. So just shortcut it, right? Thank you. So that is carried. Thank you, and thank you, Sally and Brian, for your advocation. Thank you, Gareth, for speaking to the report. Right, we will now move back to the Waiari report, and that is 8.4. And we've got Richard Conning, thank you. Page 68, thank you. So Christine is actually going to speak to this. Thank you, Christine.
So the purpose of this report is predominantly around the development contributions, although Richard is available to talk about any of the detail around the project itself, and Nick. So just to give some context, quite a number of years ago, as we were working through a variety of development contribution issues, we had a joint working party with the developers. And through that, got some agreement about how we would deal with development contributions moving forward, and it has been a much more productive relationship. As part of that, one of the commitments that we gave at that time would that we would, where we could, provide early signals to the development and the building community of upcoming changes. So the message they gave us is they make their investment decisions a couple of years in advance. And if at all possible, if the council can signal increases, then they could take that into account in determining the prices they pay for land and the prices that they set for selling their product at the end of the day. So in honouring that agreement that we made at that time, what we did last year is we sent an early signal that Waiari would come and be part of the development contributions from 2022. We now have got some further definition around what those costs are looking like and what the flow-on implications would be for the development contributions. So somewhere in the range of 5,000 to 9,000 based on the current numbers. So we're looking to signal that again this year through the development contributions policy and have an engagement process with those key stakeholders who are more directly affected at a quantity level, so that they know this is coming. So it's really just raising that with you and how it relates to the actual project itself.
Thank you very much, Christine. Questions? Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you help me with my understanding of how the extra funding required would fit within our net debt to revenue ratio. So if we went to, say, the P95 situation, we would of course charge more in terms of development contributions going forward. So you'd of course have a forecast higher revenue, but you're carrying higher debt. So I'm assuming there's a significantly negative impact, however, by having to fund that extra amount in the short term. So, I mean, is it effectively neutral on the net debt to revenue ratio, or is there actually a hit to start with? What's the story there? Can you help me with my
I'll do
understanding?
it a little bit and then
Yeah.
Paul can answer it. So in terms of the development contribution for Waiari, we've made the decision that we won't commence charging until 2022. Two reasons for that. One is that it's not in service, so those people who are building at that time don't get the benefit of it because they're not hooking to that network. But the other is because we won't know what the total costs are, and to try to minimise under collection, we only want to start paying once we know the actual costs of the project and can incorporate them at that time. I'll leave Paul to do the debt to revenue ratio.
Definitely would be an impact, particularly in terms of those forecast ratios. If we were to move to P95 and all of those big projects, we'd find the number of projects we'd then need to prioritise out simply would grow in terms of a list, because we would breach our ratios a lot quicker than otherwise based on that level. And by definition, we shouldn't be budgeting at that level anyway. So.
Sorry, but then of course we get the extra revenue from a higher development contribution. Yeah.
Sorry, so the implication of that, though, is that revenue is collected over the life of that asset, so it would be a significant lift in the debt in the short term with a longer payback, so it would have a significant impact on the actual short-term numbers.
Thank you. Councillor Arbery.
So a couple of questions just on the project itself. Yes, I was just wondering how it's tracking against its overall program, and what risks are there in terms of the physical works that may cause us to use some of that $39 million contingency, or 25 Coolen Parks worth of contingency?
Yeah, so I think we should talk to that, but it is part of the GM report for infrastructure, so if we could come back to that at that time. Thank you.
Thank you. So you can raise those questions then. Councillor Robson.
Happy to move, Chair.
Thank you. Any seconder of that? Councillor Baldock as one.
Yes.
It's the rose amongst the thorns.
Right. I've been called worse. Yeah, I think the report's self-evident. We need to get ahead of these. We need to make sure that our relationship with the development community is one where we don't ambush them. When we become aware of risk or a change in numbers, we should be talking to people early. And need I remind people that in terms of core infrastructure, this probably rates slightly more important than 25 Coolen Parks.
Absolutely. Any, Councillor Baldock, any other discussion? I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Now, we've done that. Okay, now into General Manager's Report, People and Engagement 8.6. Susan, this is your report, and if you just highlight some of the key points, and then we'll ask questions. Thank you.
Roger that. Good afternoon. Thank you for reading what is a relatively operational report of the last 3 months of the People and Engagement teams. No questions are required, or no decisions are required of you. I'll take the report as read, but I'm happy to answer any questions. I'll do my best to.
Councillor Baldock.
Yeah, I just note the appointment of a new independent chair of Rangapu Manu Whenua and the stepping down of the long-standing chair. Just imagine we have some ceremony for that, do we, to honour the 10 years and so on? Calendar already, or?
I don't believe it's in the calendar, but I have asked that question and it will be acknowledged.
Thank you. Any other questions from elected members? Okay, you're off the hook very lightly, Susan, I have to say.
what
So
you
we've
said
got
last
the, we've got the recommendations there. Just recommendation to receive the General Manager of People Engagements report. Who would like to move that? Moved by Councillor Salisbury, seconded by Councillor Hollis. Any discussion? I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. General Manager's report, strategy and growth. Christine.
So, as noted in previous reports, not a lot covered here. Most of our matters go to either the Urban Form and Transport Development Committee or the Policy Committee. So just two matters which are follow-up from matters that have been addressed. Happy to answer any questions on them.
Councillor Morris is looking like he's wanting to raise his hand. Yes, there he is. There it goes. Thank you, Councillor Morris.
A bit like bidding at an auction. Yeah, I think I'm not getting my committees confused. I asked a question via email regarding Domain Road, and so in that ambiguous question, I was referring to the Tara Road, TEL end of Domain Road. There's a swampy part there which has been deferred until discussions are held with adjoining landowners. And so I was asking whether those discussions have been held. I note that there has been some remedial works done on the road which have been received very gratefully by residents, but I'm just wondering where we're at with progressing that last stage, and whether we're able to seamlessly go into that following the completion of the Gardens Drive stage.
So there have been ongoing discussions with a range of parties that are down in that area. I may be better to discuss that in confidential because it relates to commercial development, so yeah.
Thank you. We'll make a note to include that in our confidential section. Thank you. Councillor Robson.
Yes, thank you. Short report. Paragraph 6, divestment of former Bella Vista properties. The Bella Vista issue is still alive and kicking in the virtual world and in the real world, I believe. Is it possible, it seems appropriate to ask it now, to get a copy of the Quanto report uploaded to Stella so we can see it? I've been doing some background reading just to make sure that I'm aware of the order of things and where we are in terms of being able to respond to questions from the community accurately without breaching confidentiality, and it would be helpful for me if some of the information was made available. I would ask for the Colgan report here as well, but maybe I should ask for that somewhere else. It is a Bella Vista issue, I believe. Is it possible to get those reports uploaded to Stella where we can see them and review them?
Inglis, if you could send us a list of the particular reports and then we can have a look at.
The Quanto report for starters, if we could get that up there ASAP.
Yeah, if it's a technical report.
Yeah, yes, if it's a report that's open to and available to the public, yes, or if there are reasons, I guess. I'm not sure what the report is, but we will look, and if we can make it available, we will.
Yeah, just for the record, and we are in public, we upload to Stella material that isn't available to the public, but it is available to us. So it's sort of confidentiality shouldn't be a constraint on whether it's uploaded to Stella, should it?
Well, no, I just don't know what the report has been used for and whether or not, yeah. Let's look at it, and if we can provide it, we will.
I'll move on from that. Thank you. So that's going to be noted in the minutes. Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Hollis?
Yeah, just on the same issue, yeah, it would be pretty cool to get the Colgan report. We get asked about it a lot, just saying. I'd like to know the difference expected in price for selling 22 sections to a developer compared to individually on the open market, and why that decision was taken. Since it's only 22 properties, it's not that big a deal.
the main reason behind it was because we're trying to get it developed as one lot. There are significant issues in terms of constructing the retaining walls, and that's contiguous across the entire development. Council originally was going to do a lot of that work, and now we're expecting the developer to do it. And there's quite a lot of issues in terms of actually trying to get alignment with the infrastructure, etc. So from a practical point of view, it makes more sense for one developer. That then will be sold to individuals, but someone with the skills and expertise to do that on that particular site is really more of somebody who's done development on scale, not a private individual building their one home.
So what was the difference in value of those two propositions?
You haven't got that level of detail, although I was aware that the more work we did, or proposed to do, the greater the risk actually of us actually returning less than a complete sale of the whole property. So it was on the basis of that there was no clear. It was a decision basically to pass the property over and maximise our return from the sale, as opposed to going through a subdivision consent that we'd already spent several $100,000 on, and there was no clear outcome as to where this subdivision was going.
Thank you. Councillor Baldock.
Thanks, Christine. On the Te Tumu PEI discussions regarding tolling, I wonder if you can elaborate on what their legal advice is regarding the reason they can't amend an order in council on the tolling issue. That seems kind of strange, and I see that our lawyers disagree. But do you know why they're saying that?
I can't remember all the details, sorry. It's a way of interpretation of the legislation. I'm happy to provide you a copy. We don't have a copy of their legal advice. I think we have a copy of we have a letter where some of their legal views are expressed. But I'm happy to send by email our legal advice in that letter that you can see the two positions laid out. They have agreed to the two lawyers meeting, which we're very pleased about, and we're hoping that they will work through and come to some joint position.
And if they don't, then they are indicating their support for the other option, which may still have some merit if we want to get that interchange tolled.
Yeah, and so our position as staff is that it's a call for government and for yourselves as politicians in terms of whether or not it's tolled. What we're trying to do is ensure that it is in the toolbox of available funding sources so that you can make that decision should you wish to, particularly taking into account the pressures that are on your balance sheet. So what we're trying to avoid is it being closed off as an option and that there's no pathway forward should you wish to take it.
And final, if I can, so even if the legal opinion was solid that they couldn't amend the one, I mean, they could still do a new order in council. Not put it on us to do a local government toll, but just do a new order in council for it, couldn't they?
Yes, and our understanding is that the approaches would actually become vested as NZTA road. They wouldn't be local road, and so that wouldn't be ours to toll. So generally we would construct them and we'd vest them in NZTA.
Thank you. Any other questions from elected members? So would someone like to move that we receive this General Manager's report? Councillor Robson, and seconded by Councillor Hollis. Any discussion? I'll put that. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much, Christine. General Manager's report, infrastructure 8.8. That is yours, Nick. So can you just give us a quick overview? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I think I've learned just now that I should have asked Susan to write my report. If it's a clarity issue, I'm not sure, but we'll see how we go with the questions. Obviously, we are going to talk about the Waiari water supply scheme, and I've got Richard Conning and Peter Bars here, project manager and activity manager, water supply, respectively. So I'll ask them to come up to the table, and while they do that, there's a number of issues in here that I've highlighted predominantly because they have had a profile in media or social media over the last couple of weeks or couple of months. So just a brief update on that. You've had a lot of briefings on infrastructure-related activities otherwise, so I hope that kind of covers it, but happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Robson.
Nick, thanks for the report. I think it's fine for what it's worth. I was surprised though not to see mention, given its sort of topicality, is an update on where we are with the, I think what it's euphemistically described as the transport hub in Hamilton Harrington over here. Obviously it's an area of interest for the public. This is the first chance they've had to get an update. Is there anything you can give us verbally at this stage and where we are?
Yeah, so it is included in the FARC report for next. Is it a week away? There is an item there which is around commercial aspects of the next steps. But I guess I can give you an update with some of the mechanics. Is that we have lodged a consent for the foundation, the upgrade or strengthening of the foundation. We've had a few questions around that, but nothing fatally flawed found with it, so I'm expecting that to go through the process reasonably smoothly. The superstructure redesign consenting is expected to be, it's going through just a final couple of design tweaks. We'll go take it through PS2, which is a design review, and lodge that for consent in about 3 weeks' time. So that's where that's at, so sort of mechanically, and I am expecting still to put a paper to the 10th of March council meeting for a decision as to next steps and where we take it from here. I am expecting at that time to have a timeline, costings, and some options.
Thank you. Councillor Hughes.
Just in regard to the Farm Street bus interchange, based on the relatively recent PT report and on possibilities of the underpass may or may not be going ahead, has there been any work, is there any continuing work done around that as to what the eventual outcome might be as to where it might be placed or how it may be reconfigured?
Yeah, so that is ongoing. It might be better that CJ covers that out of the strategy and planning area. But I think we need to recognise, so we talk about the Farm Street, the intersection upgrade in this report, and that by all accounts seem to be going well. But what I do think we need to acknowledge is that there is a lot going on in that area for that community, and I think there are improvement opportunities that Susan and I should look at with regards to how we go about that. There's the intersection improvements, there's walking and cycling, multimodal sort of review, what we can do in that regard. There's the general safety, the speed environment, there's the underpass, and there's the bus interchange. And I think there could easily be some confusion around sometimes what it is we're engaging and consulting about. So
in terms of the bus facility in Arataki, so we are still looking at options. The last report we brought to council was to further explore options. The option on the other side of the state highway, sort of in that golfing area, we had done some analysis on that, and it wasn't future-proofed, was insufficient room, and there was difficulty getting the buses back onto Monganui Road. So while we'll go back and just have a quick check, does it make a difference if the underpass does proceed? The work that was done indicated it probably wouldn't be a good option in the long term. What we're doing is our intention currently is to come back to the Urban Form and Transport Development Committee in April with the options, with the pros and cons of them. And then the council would make it, or the committee at that point would make a decision about what did you want to take to the community. Did you have one preferred option from that for a conversation? Did you want to put a number of options out with pros and cons for them to consider? That will be a call for you to make, and then we'll create a community engagement plan from there.
Thank you. Just some feedback on the Concord intersection that I'm getting lots of great feedback on that. It's been a really great result for the local walkers and cyclists kids. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We've been keeping an eye on that as well, and it seems to be running really smoothly, so it's a good result. Thank you for acknowledging it.
That's very good. No, we appreciate that. Councillor Baldock.
A bit of guidance, Mr Chair. I've got 3 questions, but they're not relating to Waiari, so I could wait if we do Waiari or...
No, I'm happy to do the non-wiry ones first. You
Okay.
guys are happy to sit there, thank you.
So in the Hewletts Road one, I see the investigation of the Timari and Newton Street option. I'd never heard of that before, but it's a brilliant idea. Is the fact that it's 1.3 mil and we now have to do a business case, is there not? How much are we going to spend on a business case to get NZTA funding for it?
Yeah, so
Does it involve land purchase to get through there? Because
no, I don't think it does. No. So this, the majority of that is in the physical works, but there are different levels of business cases as well, and I think the Transport Agency is recognising that there are sort of horses for courses, and there's single stage ones which aren't as complicated, and there's the full-blown one. So we met with the Transport Agency a few weeks ago and discussed options around that particular link, and have landed on that one. We tried to twist an arm and get maybe to the low-cost, low-risk ceiling raised, or look at other options, but this was deemed to be the best one. So,
bus shelters, we had a little bit of an informal discussion this week. Thank you for the report. When you come back with the report to the next meeting, I think it's in here, it might be good if we could just get an update on our current budget for bus shelters, because I think it's sort of a drip feed that we allow, and we need to look at that going into the annual plan if we're ever going to catch up on these, given how long it takes to get approval. So could that be added to that report when it comes back?
yeah, I've noted that, and I'll include that. There are alternative budget scenarios as well, of course, through advertisement, etc. So it's not all out of budget. So we can extrapolate on that too.
And final question is just on the Malimi Street, Cameron Road intersection, which is what Tina's going to come in on, I'm sure. I wonder if, I personally would like a site visit out there with staff to just discuss this without getting too deep into the weeds, as we are often told. But paragraph 10, these things don't seem to be addressing the issue of the school children getting across Malimi Street when you talk about a standalone light controlled pedestrian crossing from, across Cameron Road. That's not going to help. So maybe that's the best way to deal with it, but I'll let Tina ask some other questions too. But we might like to see a site visit if we could.
Yeah, I guess my questions would be related. Can I ask them now?
Yeah, that's fine. And then I think, Councillor Hughes, have something to add? Okay, that's fine. So let's go, Councillor Salisbury.
So we've got in here at option 9, it's looking at increasing the size of the existing pedestrian refuge, but there's no mention of a possible controlled crossing on Malimi Street further down. They're talking about a potential crossing on Cameron Road, but there's no reference to actually exploring the options for a light controlled crossing on Malimi Street. So I wonder if that's been included in this.
I'd be guessing if I said either, so I'd have to get back and check on that.
Thank you, Councillor.
Well, is it possible to have a light controlled pedestrian crossing that only functions between the hours of, for the school crossing? Because that might be a good solution, that we don't hold up the traffic all the time, but during school in the morning and school in the afternoon is when it operates.
I'm not aware of them being implemented anywhere. There's a whole raft of rules and regulations around signals, traffic lights, street furniture, and it gets pretty complicated just in terms of how they then can be enforced and where people, you know, aware of the rules and regulations around it. And I can look into it, but it'd be a long bow to draw, I'd say.
Thank you. So the summary that is that you are looking at options, and it'll come back to us in due course. Is that right? And
The longer term options, yes. Yeah. The short term options have already been put in place. Yeah. So since we picked it up, or Councillor Sonsbury picked it up for us in October time. I think it was October, November time. There's been some outlined here. Some of the short term improvements.
I think if elected members as a whole were keen to have a site visit, well, we'll leave that up to the Deputy Mayor to arrange, if that was all right with you, Councillor Bordock. Thank you. Councillor Morris.
A couple of questions through you, sir. One relates to the Infrastructure Development Code. And by way of background, Councillor Catherine Stewart had a perennial concern around the inappropriate planting of street trees in subdivisions, which council then went on to inherit, and then after 10, 15 years then had to go around replacing footpaths and dealing with a lot of concern from residents, which takes up quite a bit of elected member time in regard to trees. Now, has there been any amendments to the Infrastructure Development Code around the planting of street trees in subdivisions to try and get rid of the inappropriate planting of some species, which then cause infrastructure issues in the future, and of course future councillors having to go out and have community meetings about chopping down trees, that sort of thing? Has there been any amendments to this perennial issue?
Yeah, there was an amendment in 2018 with the update to the IDC, which at the time stipulated 1 tree per lot, etc. And there was very little flexibility around that, and also very little guidance around what you could put in and where on the berm, etc. So that was one update. And currently, for the current update of the Transport Provisions Project, there's additional guidance will be provided around what trees, so the list of species is being updated, and also if they sort of can be clustered for amenity purposes along the streets, etc. So there are updates. I can share what the list of the considered tree species are. Yeah, we have all of that. That's
Yeah.
But those most recent changes are just being drafted at the moment and consulted on, and I think we're pushing them out the door by July, August this year.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Second question, very site specific, but there on Tara Road there's a noise wall which was erected as part of the consent for that to be 4-laned, and there has been a number of complaints from residents exiting near a childcare centre that the noise wall is actually obstructing their view of cyclists, because there's a cycleway right next to the noise wall. And so there's a situation where you've got a consented noise wall, you've got a design issue perhaps with a cycleway right next to it, and then a small housing development all coming together to create a situation that's not particularly easy to resolve. Have we had any update on improvements to perhaps being able to remove part of that noise wall without having to get a variation in consent, or I don't know,
We are
realign the cycleway or something?
Yeah, so we are measuring noise levels at the moment to see whether it actually does make the difference that it's set out to achieve. So, I mean, if we don't need the noise wall, that could be a good argument to remove it despite the consent conditions. But I'm not saying that would be a sort of a home run, and it would be quite an involved process since it is a consent condition. But that could be done, and then there are sort of more costly options of lower, like a whisper seal type, which makes it a little bit less noisy from the tyre friction. Speed limits is another option we could have a look at, but I think in the first instance we'll come back to you with regards to the need or otherwise of that noise wall to meet the required levels.
Thank you. Councillor Robson, did you wish to ask a question? Okay. Councillor Hughes and then Salisbury.
Just the separated cycleway along Gulf Road have we got an update on that as to whether it has now been changed into a shared path or whether it's still proceeding as a separated cycleway?
It's a separated cycleway, separated in terms of physical separation to the traffic, with a little concrete nib along the wall, and it's on either side.
That's still in the program?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Salisbury.
I just have a question about how do we initiate some reviews of streets. So I had a public meeting a couple of weeks ago in Welcome Bay, and a number of the residents raised issues around the speeds of around 80k up to 100k going up and down Waitaha, and dangerous driving, which is there's a few near misses that are going on even with cars mounting the footpath because of the speed and the dangerous driving. How do we review speeds on streets and whether we can mitigate that through speed bumps or chicanes, or what options do we have there?
Yeah, there are some options, and one of them is enforcement, of course. So one option is to talk to police and see if they can do anything about that. That's outside of our jurisdiction, of course, but it's a very effective one. There we can put cameras in there to get a little bit, keep a closer eye on it and manage it through not manage it, but monitor it through TTOC, and then maybe have connections with police that way. The other way is to look at whether the speed environment is perceived or understood by the road users. Is it easy enough to read that it is a 50k zone, or do we need to do anything different? And that is about the road environment, the widths, the roads, and the roadside, and the general environment. And I guess additional signage could be another option. Sometimes the trick is, though, that it's voluntary speeding, which is really tricky to do something about without a physical intervention, and then all of a sudden you look at chicanes and interventions like that, which has cost implications, throughput implications, etc.
So what would be required to initiate investigating the options for that street?
I think you may just have.
It's as simple as that, Councillor Salisbury.
Well, so our safety engineers, they've generally got a really good control of what's going on the network, and if there are perceived or real issues, they tend to deal with it rather swiftly. Very, very passionate about their work. So if there's a whiff of something not quite right, we'll chase it down. That's not to say that we'll come back with a solution in a hurry, but at least we can take a look at it and see. I'm also curious now whether it's a road that's in our top 10% of the speed limit review. So for our entire network, we have desktop analyses of the current speed limit and the safe and appropriate speed limit. And the top 10% by that is meant that, for the top 10% where they are misaligned in terms of death and serious injuries, they are the ones that we would like to chase down. So I'd be interested to see if that's one of them.
Thanks very much for that, Nick, and thanks for raising it, Councillor Salisbury. Any other questions? Now we'll move on to the Waiari project. Councillor Arbery, you had two specific questions, if you can remember what they were. I'm sure that you can. And then we've got Peter and Richard here to answer anything else. Thank you.
Yeah, well, one was just, we've got the circa $40 million contingency. Just wondering if you can talk through some of the ground condition risks, or whether there might be ko iwi that we might dig up, or what are some of the key risks that might cause us to use that? And yeah, just keen to get a general update on the project.
Sure, through the chair. So key risks associated with the project for what we have in construction right now are primarily around ground conditions. So on two fronts, the first one being the intake works. We are in the process of doing the ground improvement to support the intake pump station. So that's requiring piling to a relatively deep depth in quite poor soil conditions with a lot of underground logs, buried logs. So a bit of risk around what we find and what effect that has on both program and cost. That is being actively managed. The contractor's gone through and probed the entire footprint and removed the logs that they could, down to about 6 metres. But we're piling through to 12 to 15, so there's still kind of some uncertainty there. Obviously managing that as closely as we can, but that's a big risk item. The other main one in terms of ground conditions is a section of the trunk pipeline goes through peat swamp, through Armour Farms. Again, we know there's buried logs. That information was brought to the contractor's attention at tender stage, so they are aware of the risk, though obviously the degree or number of logs that they find in the process of trenching that pipeline in, can't, there's still some risk that sits with TCC around that.
So those, you have agreed contract rates, or how are those VOs handled?
Well, it would depend on the nature of the VO or the claim before it becomes a variation, and a matter for the engineer to deal with. I am not across all of the contract details. That's not my role, my project manager's role. At the end of the day, the independent engineer needs to either approve or not approve variation claims. Though obviously, council as the principal can make remonstrations to the engineer around any claims that come through, but there are processes in place to ensure that we are getting value for money out of the projects as they progress, and that we are working to keep them on track as best we can as well in terms of time.
Thank you. Any other questions about the Waiari project? All good? Can you just explain the project governance structure that's around it?
Sure. Or Nick, would you? Yeah, so I can explain that. So this is one of a project which has had a governance structure in place since more or less its inception, I think, with internal and external experts from the sector, and very, very high level, I should say. And so that kind of, just relating back to some of the Greenstone recommendations, this is one which was seen as a high-risk one very early on, and has had that level of governance structure involved since the start. And then, so there's a governance group and then a steering group. So there are significant intelligence going into the decision making behind it. And actually, many of those Greenstone recommendations have actually been implemented on this. I must say many of them aren't news to us, and I think as an organisation we have often known what parts of those problems are, and I think they aren't necessarily contract or engineering or procurement related, but you could actually raise it to a level where we have known about these things, and as an organisation we've struggled to implement it from a change management perspective, with business administration around it, and that's something that Marty and I have been talking to the executive about, and bringing what we know of our high risk components, and bringing that together to get closer to best practice, I guess.
Thanks for that. Okay, no other questions. Thank you, gentlemen, for your input on that.
Can I?
Yeah, sure.
Can I go back just briefly to the Malimi Street? Just as a suggestion, I am a little bit reluctant to organise a site visit and design by committee. And so as a first step,
if I could suggest that we get those interested to sit down with the safety engineers and myself, and we can walk through what we have already looked at.
Please, that would be fantastic, and we'll just make
And
a
then
note
if we want further design work after that, I'm more than happy to accommodate it. But I just thought, for simplicity and a first step, that could be the better way to go.
Thank you, Nick, for that suggestion, and we'll note that in the minutes. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got a recommendation to receive Nick's report. Happy to move from Councillor Baldock, seconded by Councillor Salisbury. Discussion, I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. General Manager's Report, Corporate Services. Paul Davidson, this is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Take the report as read. Really just wanted to highlight two key initiatives underway at the moment. The first is the Strategic Finance Project. Some 2 months away from implementation. Alan's here to answer any more detailed questions, but project is currently running well. It's now moved into the phase of working right across the business, so there's a lot of work, not just within finance but in digital, but the wider business as well. So that's tracking well for an implementation early April. The second is just an issue which keeps coming up around car parking at the airport. Just to let you know that there are some short-term initiatives that will free up a number of car parks that will be undertaken over the next couple of months. So you'll see some work done in that space. And any other questions?
Thank you. Councillor Avery.
I just get the sense there might be some big dollar bills coming our way with that seismic assessments underway of those other car parks. Just wondering, do we have a summary of our buildings and where they're at in terms of whether they've had ISAs, DSAs, and whether we have a forecast of our building portfolio yet in terms of total strengthening costs?
At this point, no. We've done it obviously across the main campus buildings, and as you say, we're currently undertaking that work at Elizabeth and Spring Street.
So do you have an idea of how many buildings or what proportion of buildings we haven't completed an ISA on or DSA on?
I'll get that for you. I'll send it out. Yep.
Can you just, for the sake of those listening, explain what those acronyms are? Thank you.
Initial seismic assessment and detailed seismic assessment.
Thank you. Those watching on YouTube will be very grateful. Thanks. Anyone else have any questions of Paul's report? Okay. Councillor Baldock.
Just the issue, page 113 of D, the public Wi-Fi on the beach. What is the significance of the fact that 148 people per day use the service as opposed to 6,797 devices coming onto the beach? It's fascinating. I guess it means people don't go and use their devices on the beach. But how are we using that with the social media stuff? Are we expecting people to take pictures on the beach and send them on Facebook or something to help promote the beach, or how are we going to use that?
Get Alan to answer that.
So some of the feedback that we had through the last LTP, especially around the Mount area, was the number of tourists specifically that were all piled up in small areas where free Wi-Fi was available, and you can still see it today when you drive down Main Street, 50 people all clambered around one seat just trying to get Wi-Fi to do things. So the intent of the trial, primarily was, if we offer a similar type of service in a prime location, will that encourage people to stay there rather than move and then come back, and will they actually use it? So the data that we're seeing at the moment is lots of people are choosing to use it. We're seeing uptake that is probably quite similar to norms in other tourist areas. One thing that we have chosen to do that other offerings don't do is we do force a person that wants to use it to acknowledge our terms and conditions. Now, most other free Wi-Fi providers don't do that. We're doing that because it's going through our network, and we wanted a level of acknowledgement and control over what was being browsed and delivered So that does create a barrier, because some people just will choose not to do that. So that is something that we could look at removing. That would sort of instantly uplift, because what that means at the moment is you walk down there, you connect to the Wi-Fi, you've kind of got to go to a web page and click OK. If that went away, then as soon as your device was down there, if it's set to auto-connect, it would auto-connect, so that would see that lift. In terms of the data throughput, as you can kind of see from the report there, you know, seeing pretty high uptake of social channels, and while it's hard to, by hard I mean actually impossible to directly correlate whether somebody on Instagram is actually posting a photo of the mount, I think one is pretty safe to correlate that there is some relationship between the two.
Yes, I accept your interpretation of it. When I saw 148 people per day with 6,797, I didn't think that was high uptake, but it is, I guess, based on averages.
Yeah, I guess one of the I don't know if it's an issue, but the reality of that site is that it's right next to a road. So you've got a bunch of cars going down it, and so people aren't actually necessarily ever trying to, right? So the device is going past. Now, if it's in a park, you have a completely different setup because it's people there. So, yeah.
Thanks for clarifying that. Any other questions, Councillor Arbery?
Probably another one for you. So you're confident it doesn't create a cybersecurity risk for us if they're connecting onto our network, or is that network separate from our corporate network?
Yeah, so that network is on the guest side of our environment, so it sits outside of the corporate environment. That is where all of our dark fibre that we deliver and all of our third-party customers. So basically, any party that uses our fibre network goes through that same setup and is isolated.
Thank you. No other questions? Who would like to move that we receive this report? Someone? Councillor Hollis, seconded by Councillor Morris. Any discussion? I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Alan. Barbara, General Manager's Report, Regulatory and Compliance, 8.10.
Thank you, and good afternoon, councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to present the stats and some highlights on the work that our group has done over the last few months. Just a couple of updates that I'd like to give you and then take the report as read. In relation to the environmental planning staff, I'm absolutely thrilled to say that we've been able to attract some planners to our team. So that will certainly take the pressure off the existing planners and give us some opportunities to develop some really good, robust processes and procedures that have been lax for a while. Secondly, the IANZ audit, I'd hoped I'd have an update on that. We provided IANZ with all the information they required in the time that they asked us to do. They've come back to us with a few more questions. We've responded to those questions and needed to get an extension of time to give them that response, and we're still waiting for an answer. So I'm hopeful we've managed to answer their questions correctly, and we'll go forth from here. And just in relation to the food verification audit, it's recorded in the report as being scheduled for March. We've just heard that will be postponed because of the workload of the auditors, and at this point we don't know when that will be postponed to. So happy to take some questions.
Thank you. Questions of elected members? Councillor Arbery.
Yeah, a couple of questions. So one is, how many general non-compliances are left to close out? And another one is, I suppose it's more of a big picture question, but do we get external audits on our system for implementing, I suppose, the food safety or food licensing premises? And similarly, do we have external reviews of things like our pound operation and animal control?
In relation to the GNCs, or general non-compliances, we're down to 4 non-compliances. 2 of those have been partially cleared. Just like to note there that these are procedural non-compliances as opposed to anything technical. and external audits, the only two external audits that are legislated for is the building function, the Building Control Authority, and the food plans, and they're legislated for. As far as other external audits, no, not really. Not unless we feel that we've got some gaps and then we need to get we need to be proactive, but there's not a formal audit process.
Councillor Hollis.
Yeah, I think it's going to be pretty easy. The graph that shows us building inspection wait times, can you explain the numbers on it?
Yes,
Thanks.
Councillor, I can, and it's not particularly clear. But one thing I'd like to point out on that graph is that it's an average. So the city is divided into three sectors. So, excuse me. So while in particularly around the lakes and Bethlehem's, the inspection day wait might be 2 to 5 days, and over at Papamoa it's more like 2 weeks. So what you have in front of you is average. So when you look at the numbers, I think that when it goes to, and I'm just trying to find that graph. So when you look, so the 0.1 is 1 day wait, the 0.5 is 1 week. When you get up to the numbers up there that are 1, that's a 2 week, so somewhere in between, depending on where the graph is. Yeah, it was something that I had recalled at the last minute that Councillor wanted, so it's, we will tidy it up for next time.
Thank you. Councillor Baldock.
Yeah, just to the graph about the infringements issued for Freedom Camping, if I can, on page 131. First, just 2 things. First of all, we used to get a report, and it doesn't need to be every PSOC, but I know 6 monthly or something, maybe if I could request at the next one, of how much of that money we've collected. Because when we first started this more stricter monitoring and dealt with some of the issues around Coolum Park and so on, we were balancing out what the cost was as opposed to what we were getting from infringement, so it would be helpful if we could have an update on that. And secondly, a confession. I got busted for Freedom Camping in the wrong place up on Coromandel. Long weekend, but the very nice enforcement officer only gave me a warning because I mounted the argument that I was there because the other spaces were full with flipping compliant, but they all had the stickers on it. And he told me that there is a new regime coming out about the stickers. Are we familiar with that? He said they're all going to have to get new stickers, and this is going to deal with the ones who buy the little portable loo and stick it under the thing or on the roof and never use it, and yet manage to park in these Freedom Camping spots. And I thought this was good news because it's obvious they're getting away with this. They're not really fully compliant vehicles. Are we aware of that change?
Firstly, yes, certainly next time in the report that I can give you some dollars around what we've collected and the cost of delivering the service. Secondly, around the new regime, I know that there has been some discussions around changes to the regime, but I'm not aware of the details, but I can certainly put that in the next 6 weekly report too, Councillor.
Thanks, Barbara. Any other questions? Just a question from me in terms of the elapsed time for building consents, and in December they deteriorated. Well, the last 2 Decembers have deteriorated from the previous ones. Can you just explain, well, first of all, how has that got worse and what is happening to alleviate that?
So just by way of background for perhaps some the newer councillors, a lapse day is, excuse me, and just to note that when we talk about days, we talk about working days. So lapse days is the length of time it's taken from the day you lodge it to the day you get consent. And sometimes the clock stops because we're looking for information. So while we're pretty proactive around encouraging people to respond as quickly as they can, and in some senses this is a stat that sits with our customers as opposed to us per se, I don't know that there's a specific answer as to why it gets a little bit worse in December, other than, I guess, the normal busyness of December and people responding to those RFIs as quickly as they would for the other 11 months of the year, and potentially us not contacting them as often as we can. So I think it's just generally a busy time of the year that has those, the trends are it's usually higher in December.
Thank you. Yeah, I wasn't specifically, it was more sort of inter-year rather than just as 1 month on its own, but no, that's fine. Thank you for that. Any other questions? So would someone like to move that we receive that General Manager's report? Thank you, Councillor Hollis and Salisbury. Any discussion? I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. There's no late items to discuss, so, and I don't think anyone else has got anything to raise at this point. So I'd like to close the this open part of the meeting and move into public excluded. Can I have a mover and a seconder to do that? Councillor Salisbury and Morris, any discussion? I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you very much. We'll just wait for the YouTube to come off. Live stream.